Hello. In this session, I'm just doing a quick recording to show you how you can go about protecting your APIs using Tyk and a third-party identity provider such as Keycloak. So in this session, what we're going to be doing is protecting, we're pretending that this is our upstream service, this HTTP bin request response service. You can send a GET request to this service, and then we can pass in some query string parameters such as foo equals bar, and then it just returns back to you the response. Or maybe you could just send another thing to like anything, or maybe you just want the headers and it returns back the response headers, or maybe you just want the IP address or something like that. So it's a nice little HTTP REST testing tool. So let's head over to Tyk Gateway, because obviously we need to pretend this is deployed inside your own infrastructure. And let's configure Tyk Gateway to be able to reverse proxy to this service. So in order to do that, you can head over to APIs and you can add a new API. It's a HTTP API, and let's call it HTTP bin. And this upstream URL, we'll change that to HTTPS, is httpbin.org. So it's pointing to this host name here. So that means when the request arrives at the gateway, it listens on this particular API and then reverse proxies to this HTTP bin service. Let's disable authentication just for the purposes of this. We can turn that off here, and then we can save that. So now if we head over to Postman, we've got the gateway. So now when we go send a request to HTTP bin/get, the request arrives at the gateway. It will match this listen path to the API that we configured in the gateway, realize where it has to reverse proxy the message to, strip that path, and then send it to the /get endpoint. So we can then send, and that will allow us through. And you can see the response there. Now, obviously that's no good. We want to protect the API. So how do we go about protecting this API? And obviously we want to protect it using a third-party identity provider, such as Keycloak. So in order to do that, we can enable authentication, and we can configure this to accept JSON Web Token authentication. So with JSON Web Tokens, what we need to do is configure a signing method, which would be an RSA public key. Now we can either put a static public key in here for the gateway to validate, or what we can do is put the URL of the JSON Web Key set of Keycloak. So this is the JSON Web Key. This is the well-known OpenID configuration endpoint, and you'll see that there is a JWKS URI here. And so this JWKS URI, JSON Web Key Set URI, you can click on this URL, and what it will do is it will return you the current public keys, which allows Keycloak to go ahead and rotate the signing keys and things like that. So let's just go ahead and copy this URL, and then head over to here and paste that there. Now, the identity source, we can get onto this later, but I like to use client ID. Policy field name, we can ignore that. Default policy, we'll go back to that in a moment. Let's update this API. And what we'll do now is we'll create a security policy to grant access to this service. And this is called my policy. We can just ignore that. So now that we've got this policy, we can go back to the APIs, scroll down here, and what we can apply is this default policy and update that API. So let's head over to Keycloak now, and we'll head over to clients, and in here let's create a client, and my client ID is going to be called test. Let's click on next, and I want to disable the standard flow and disable direct access. Can we enable that? How do we enable service account roles? Allows you to authenticate this client if you have access to client credentials grant. So how do I enable that? Client authentication on, turn that off. So we're turning on client authentication, and we enable service accounts to enable the client credentials grant. So this is like machine to machine. And let's go ahead and save that. So we've got test as the client ID. And this should all be enabled. Let's keep it all standard for the time being. We head over to keys or credentials, and the client authenticator is client ID and client secret. And what we should have here is our client secret. So I just want to make sure this is saved. I've not actually used this version of Keycloak before, so just checking. So let's head over to credentials, and we've got the client ID and client secret. So let's head back. Let's head back to here and reverse, because we need to access this token endpoint to do the OAuth 2 client credentials dance. So we can copy this token endpoint and head over to Postman, because when we send a request to this endpoint, we'll see that our authorization field missing. So somehow we need to get this job from somewhere. Now, if we click on the authorization tab, and then we enable OAuth 2 authorization with the client credentials grant, and that access token URL is that link that I copied from here, from the token endpoint. Now, our client ID is test, and our client secret, if we head back here, and don't worry, I'm going to delete this all after, I can paste that there. So I should be able to click to get a new access token, proceed, and now I've got an access token, which is valid for so many seconds, etc. So with that access token, I just want to show you what it looks like at the moment. And in here, we can see, you see the client ID is test, and actually it's in camel case. So let me just copy that, and you'll see that I've misconfigured my gateway here. And paste that there and update. So now that we've been able to now that we've got our access token, I should be able to use this token on the API. So now I've got that access token, I should be able to send that request, I hope. Oh no, authorization field missing. Let's get a new access token, proceed. There's a use token button. So when I say use token, what it will then do is inject that access token into the request, and then I can send that request. And you can see what it does is it automatically injects that authorization bearer token there. And that's how you can gain access to your services or protect your services using Tyk and a third-party identity provider just like Keycloak. Thank you very much.